And welcome back to Divorcing Your Mortgage. I'm your host, Marc Gertz. It's my pleasure this week to introduce Susan Haworth. Susan holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and 2 masters, as well as postmaster credentials in counseling. In addition to publishing articles in numerous trade journals, she's been featured in the Wall Street Journal and on national and international radio, podcasts, and television programs. Susan's book, A Change Would Do You Good, Proven Strategies for Creating the Life You Want, is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and she is known for that. However, for our program, the thing that we're going to talk with her mostly about is her specialty, which is counseling people with regard to being step parents in divorcing situations, especially when it comes to raising children. Susan, thanks so much for making the time to join us.
Thank you, Mark. It's a real thrill to be with you today.
Good. Thank you. So I was wondering if you could give us just a little bit of your evolution, okay, in terms of how you got into counseling and then how you ended up narrowing into working with step families.
Yeah. So I was a mental health counselor. I was trained as a mental health counselor, and I worked in inpatient psychiatric hospitals as well as outpatient community mental health centers. And then I also worked in corporations doing executive coaching. And for about a dozen years, I was a school-based counselor. So I worked with adolescents mostly. And 7 years ago, I decided I was going to devote myself to working with step parents because about 28 years ago, I became a step parent. And I've got to tell you, Mark, it was the hardest role I have ever done. It's the hardest thing I've ever encountered for a number of reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into. I felt very much alone in that role, felt very lonely, isolated. I couldn't find resources. So in my mind, I always knew that this was what I wanted to do. I just had to wait for the right time for me to go into private practice and devote myself to step families and supporting step parents. And as I said, that was about 7 years ago.
So when you became a step parent, how old were the children?
They were teenagers. All 3 of them were teenagers.
Okay.
Which, according to research, that is the toughest time to enter to form a step family. But I work with all kinds of step families right now, and each is unique and has its own struggles. So I can't say, you're better off doing this or that, because it depends very much on a lot of dynamics and a lot of what happened in the first family.
So let me ask you this. You became a step parent 28 years ago?
Yeah.
All right. And that's when you first became aware of the unique differences in that type of a situation. And 28 years ago was really before the internet.
Yes.
For all intents and purposes. Would you say now that there are more resources for step parents?
There are absolutely more resources. That we enter into this, and I entered into it with my eyes wide shut. That is true for most of my clients. There are more resources, but there's still a lot of myths around it, and there is a secrecy around it because there's a lot of shame when you're not doing it well. The resources there are more books for sure. There's the Stepmom magazine.
Stepmom magazine.
Yes, and that started 15 years ago.
Okay.
And I'm a writer for Stepmom magazine. I have an advice column called the Stepmom Whisperer. So that
I like that.
Yeah. And it's great fun for me. People send in questions. I get to give my opinions, and I understand it's very helpful for people.
You're the Ann Landers of stepmoms. There you go. Yeah. Okay.
Always wanted to be. So yeah. So there are more resources. There are more people like me devoting themselves to step family issues. Still not enough. There are so many of us out there frequently my clients say to me, I don't know any stepmoms. We're everywhere and we're nowhere because we
Uh-huh.
don't announce it. We don't talk about it.
Hmm.
And so we'll talk, I'm sure, about some resources and how people can contact folks, other resources, but there's more out there, but still not enough, Mark.
Let me ask you something. Is there a difference from a step parenting point of view? Is there a difference if the previous parent was part of a divorce, or if the previous parent died, or if the previous parent had developed a mental illness? Do each of those have their own unique issues?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great question, Mark. Thanks for asking it.
Hmm.
Prior to about 1950, most step families formed because of death.
Mm-hmm.
So we needed to find another spouse, plug him or her in, and keep
Mm-hmm.
the family going and keep the farm going. Then, in around the mid-century, mid-20th century, divorce started happening more frequently.
1970s, right? A little, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so that is when that trend started. It was different. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, about 90% of step families are formed because of divorce, not.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so there is a different dynamic. Now, some of my stepmoms wish that the biological parent was dead, was no longer around, but
Yeah,
be careful
well.
what you wish for,
Mm-hmm.
because then you're dealing with grieving children. You're dealing with the ghost, if you will,
Mm.
of a mom or dad who could do nothing wrong. So there's a lot. There are different dynamics. Um, Co-parenting is a huge challenge for step parents,
Mm-hmm.
but even without co-parenting, there are big challenges with raising kids that aren't your own.
Yeah, of course. I happen to have experienced this. I was a stepfather,
Mhm,
okay,
mhm.
many years ago, which actually brings me to the question. You started off talking about stepmoms and Stepmom Magazine. Um, is 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 what you do, is the counseling that you do specifically female oriented, or do you also work with fathers?
I work with divorced dads as well, and
Okay.
I have great compassion for
Mm-hmm.
divorced dads because they
Mm-hmm.
are torn, their allegiances are torn, and we can get into that a little bit more. But most often, I would say that my stepmoms are the ones who contact me initially.
Gotcha. Okay.
They're the ones who are suffering, and we can talk about why that is.
Mm.
Now, by extension, everyone is struggling, but the first point of contact very often for me is the woman, the stepmom.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We have a totally different set of expectations for women than men. I know this is not like, you know, an unusual statement to make.
Right.
But for stepmoms, they get a lot of responsibility, no authority, of course. Sometimes the divorced dad needs help, and so he's, here, you take the kids. So there's a lot there, and we as women have a lot of expectations of ourselves as nurturers. Stepdads, for the most part, and these are generalizations, of course, but for the most part, they get a lot of passes. You know, if they're breathing in
Okay.
and out, they show up occasionally, we're good. Uh,
Okay.
we don't expect a lot from them, but we
Mm-hmm.
do expect a lot from stepmoms and from women in general. So it's
Gotcha.
societal pressures and expectations, and it's personal, individual expectations as well.
Okay. I'm sure we can go in. There's a few different directions we can go. But one of the things that I'm really curious about is step parents and divorce. And what I mean by that is, I mean, obviously, if somebody comes in as a step parent, like you said, most of the time it's because there was a divorce. But statistically, second marriages have pretty high divorce rates too. Okay. What happens in that type of a situation where you have a step parent, and now 3, 4, 5 years later, for whatever reason, that marriage is coming apart. Um, what what is the situation that step parent finds themselves in, and I guess also what makes step parenting so challenging that the divorce rate is so high?
Yeah, yeah. So right now it's estimated to be about 70%.
Mm,
And that is probably, I think it's conservative. And the reason I think it's conservative is that very often, I mean, that's the legal divorce rate.
mm-hmm.
Very often couples get together and they form a union without being formally married for a
Right.
second marriage. In particular, for first relationships as well, but for second
Mm-hmm.
families more so, because there's a little bit of being gun shy, So, and those break up probably more frequently. We don't
Uh-huh.
really have great statistics about that,
Okay.
but raising somebody else's children, living with somebody else's children is puts a lot of pressure on the family that we don't have as first families. First of all, in a first family, very often there's a period where the couple gets to bond. They get autonomy, they get privacy, it's afforded them. Maybe, the kids come, usually one at a time, and
Mm-hmm.
they usually come as infants, right? So you're in a second family, you get kids all at once, fully formed, kids you had no input in how they were raised. And
Mm-hmm.
there are differences in parenting styles.
Sure.
You don't have an opportunity to develop together as a family.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of stressors in that second family that you just don't have in the first family, on
Mm-hmm.
top of all the stressors of marriage, living with another human being.
Sure.
So it's like added pressure. And there's very often the step families don't really know where to turn for support or help. And so
Mm-hmm.
they dissolve.
Even in this day and age with the internet, step families don't know where to turn for help.
They don't.
Oh, that's really interesting. Um, I didn't grow up with the internet, and it took me a while, but I finally embraced the fact that search engines were the equivalent of the Dewey Decimal System, which a lot of people don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. So it's like whenever I have a question about something, I just open up my phone and put it in. Put the question into Google or Yahoo or Safari. And but on the step parenting side, that's not the case. There isn't that much information.
Well, most of my clients tell me that they found me through Google,
Okay.
but when it comes to seeking help, most people ask around. They ask for their, referrals. They ask, different their friends, their doctors. That's how a lot of people go about.
Right.
You want some assurance that the person you're going to click with them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but with step families, step parents are a little more reluctant to admit that they're having struggles.
I see.
And so, because one of the things I hear all the time, Mark, is people will say to me, I know a lot of step families, they're doing great. And I said, and how do you know that? Well, they don't seem to fight in front of me, or that is
Uh-huh.
not how it works. People do not admit that they're struggling. There is, as I said, a lot of shame involved in it, especially if they've been through divorce before. So they do take to Google sometimes,
Okay.
but not everybody does that. A lot of
Okay.
people suffer silently
Mm-hmm.
a long time, for a very long time. Here is something I would caution everyone about. I often get people who have seen therapists or counselors about their step family issues, and it hasn't
Mm-hmm.
gone well
Mm-hmm.
because that person was not versed in step family dynamics.
Okay.
And you cannot look at a step family through a first family lens. It is not the same animal.
Well, that's interesting. Okay.
And so it is confounding to some people. Here's one of the myths. It's confounding to some people that a stepmom wouldn't love her stepkids, because what mom, what decent mom
Okay.
doesn't love their kids? So there's a book that is a wonderful resource
Uh-huh.
called Step Monster. And that is very often what stepmoms feel like, because they don't love their stepkids. They love their partner,
Right.
but why would they love somebody else's kids? I mean, you could
Gotcha.
love, we use that word love. We love pizza. We love chocolate ice cream.
Right.
It's different. So
Mm-hmm.
before they can
Mm-hmm.
love a kid, but
Okay.
living with a kid is very different.
Okay. So can you give us two or three ideas of differences, specific differences between parenting and step parenting?
Yes.
Okay.
First of all, as a parent, you have authority. You can discipline your kids. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. But you
Right.
are the authority figure. If you try to be the authority figure as a step parent, it does not end well. The kids resent it. Earlier in your program, I heard you talk about family loyalty. Family loyalty is so big after divorce when a new family is formed. The kids just automatically are more loyal to their biological parents.
Sure.
And so that is one big difference, is that you have no authority. You might have responsibility, but you have no authority. The second, and we can get into this later, is
Mm-hmm.
about co-parenting.
Okay.
So we don't have to deal with that as a first family. You don't co-parent.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we should, but we don't.
That's right. Maybe we should bring in the whole village, right?
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we
Yeah.
do.
Well, one of the things that we've spoken on this show about previously is uh, uh, couples coming up with rules. And one of the rules that we talk about is rules with regard to dating. And we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, let's dive into that and regard to step parenting as well. Okay?
Fabulous. Thank
All
you.
right. You're listening to Divorcing Your Mortgage. I'm your host, Marc Gertz, and we'll be right back after this. And we're back on Divorcing Your Mortgage. I'm your host, Marc Gertz. We were talking with Susan Haworth before the break about some of the stressors and strains on co-parenting, especially out of a divorce. And one of those things that that we've talked about on this show before is when couples try to put together rules in co-parenting situations. One of the things that they discuss is dating, and they discuss what new partners are going to look like, and what the rights and the rules and all of that, and a lot of that impacts a new step parent, all right, and the relationship between that step parent and the children. Susan, can you give us some insights into the step parent's point of view with regard to the what I'll call the original couple's dating rules and things of that nature?
Yeah, it's a good question. In my day, we didn't do much with parenting plans. We
Mm-hmm.
got a divorce, and then whatever happened happened. But right now, there's a trend, and I think it's very positive to have things more spelled out in parenting plans. And in the parenting plan,
Mm-hmm.
some people drill down to, when do you introduce a new person to the kids? And I think this is pretty healthy, actually. It may sound a little picky, but I think it's healthy. So some of the parenting plan says, well, after 6 months, you can introduce 6 months of dating, introduce the new person. Maybe they agree to not have sleepovers while the kids are there, all of that. And it's up to the couple. They have to agree, and it needs to be in writing. That's another thing about, things need to be in writing. It doesn't exist if it's not in writing.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. People's memories are horrible when it comes to
There are all
comes to
kinds of
rulemaking.
problems,
Yep.
kinds of problems that happen.
Right.
So one of the issues that happens with the stepmoms in particular is that they don't stay in their lane. They don't stay in their stepmom lane. And they cross up. That's when they start doing the disciplining of the kids or taking on more responsibilities than they should. And that's where the friction happens between the stepmom and the bio mom. And I'm on a mission, Mark, to make sure that to untangle that web between the bio mom and the stepmom, because they need to be allies, not best friends. They don't need to have lunch.
Right.
Cats need to be allies. You need to peacefully, cooperatively co-parent.
So let me ask you something about that. Okay, I don't mean to interrupt, but let me ask you something about that. One of the interesting things about collaborative divorce in particular, which I know you're familiar with, is the fact that they put this big team around the couple. So my first question, simply yes or no, is do you coach couples with a step parent?
I do a lot of couples work.
You do?
Yes,
Okay.
I do a lot of couples work, but I'm not involved, and I wish I were.
Yeah.
The collaborative divorce process.
Concept. Okay, that's fine. So, but what I'm asking is, you will meet with a step parent and the parent and talk to them together.
Well, I meet with the couple. So let me explain. So and it's really necessary because these are relationship problems. We cannot solve relationship problems by ourselves as individuals.
No, it's very hard.
It is very difficult. So I work with couples frequently. Sometimes I'll work with one or the other, and I do have a couple of divorced dads who are clients separately. But I don't work with, I would like to do this at some point.
Right.
I don't work with the other side, the other household. I think that is neglected, but it's so often contentious, that relationship, that it would be difficult. I do know of a mediator who does that.
Okay. Well, the reason I was asking you that question is that I've always felt that one of the ironies of collaborative divorce is that we spend so much time and energy and money to put all of these wonderful mental health professionals around a couple so they can learn how to communicate well and break up. But nobody ever thinks of doing that to keep them together. You know what I'm saying? And I was just wondering in your situation, if there's ever a situation where you're coaching let's say you're coaching the father, the stepmother, and the mother, together to figure out how to communicate and how best to keep the situation child-centric.
Yes, I think that is brilliant. I have certainly thought about it, and I have sent out some feelers for that because I think it's really important. To my knowledge, I don't know that it's being done.
Okay.
It may be. It may be, but I don't know about that. Very often in divorce, there is a step family forming in the wings.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think we're neglecting that. I know very often, family law attorneys are involved also, not in the actual divorce. Well, they're involved in divorce, of course, but they're also involved in modifying the child support and child custody arrangements. And so that is certainly a place where all parties should get together.
These things could come together. Sure. It makes
Absolutely.
perfect sense. So most of the time when you're coaching stepmoms individually a great deal of the time.
I would say mostly it's the stepmoms individually and their partners.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. All
So,
right.
so for example, because it just, unless the partner's not willing, which doesn't bode well, of course, but
Mm-hmm.
mostly we need to work on the relationship with the partner.
Mm-hmm.
I do have support groups for stepmoms only.
Okay.
And I have talked someone else I know into having a support group for divorced dads.
Okay. So let me ask you this. How can divorced dads help their partners who may be struggling with the stepmom role?
Yeah, yeah. The first thing is a divorced dad needs to make sure he has his allegiances in line. He knows what's most important. I think what he thinks is he has to keep everybody happy,
Hmm.
which is of course impossible. But his primary relationship is with his new partner, not with his former partner. And I think a lot of fear comes in with thinking he can't get his former partner angry,
Hmm.
do anything to cross her. I fear that giving her a lot more power than she really has, than she needs
Right.
to be given. So
Right.
that is what one thing that he can do. The other
Okay.
thing is to not dump so much responsibility on the stepmom,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
and to be clear about what his role is as as the biological parent. He needs to take on a lot. He needs to do the heavy lifting,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a reality.
I'm not sure that's what most men are envisioning when they get remarried. I think they're probably envisioning just the opposite. Let's take a quick break and we'll get into that a little bit deeper. All right. You're listening to Divorcing Your Mortgage. I'm your host, Marc Gertz, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Divorcing Your Mortgage. We're talking with Susan Haworth, and before the break, Susan mentioned that she felt that fathers in a step parenting situation with a new mother in the house were supposed to do most of the heavy lifting. And I said that I think many of them are thinking just the opposite, that now all of a sudden they've got a wife to take care of all that stuff and they can go about their business. Susan, is that sort of the norm? And if it is, how do you counteract that?
Yeah, I think it is the norm. And that's where when we're working together that's not going to work. It's just it leads to resentment, which is a big buzzkill for relationships, right? So they need to take on more of the responsibility and take that off the stepmom plate. And the other thing that divorced dads can do is realize that the goal is not to force love. You can't do it. But
Mm-hmm.
they sometimes have this fantasy that their new partner is going to love their kids the way they do. And what we're going for here is respect, mutual respect. We're
Mm-hmm.
going for peaceful coexistence, and all the rest is gravy. So, Mark, I do not use the term blended because I think it puts a lot of pressure. And frankly, it doesn't always happen.
Mm.
And so we don't need to blend families. We just need to make sure we peacefully coexist.
Well, I think most of us, when we think of step parents, especially those of us of a certain age, we immediately think of the Brady Bunch. That's like, and that's our only real frame of reference. We think that's the way it's supposed to be. And when you said a blended family, that's what made me think of it.
Exactly. The Brady Bunch is certainly formed my opinions of what my life was going to be like.
You were supposed to do, right?
And I was going to solve all problems in 30 minutes or less.
Of course.
of course, and the problems were going to be hilarious, you know. So that has done a lot of damage in the myth building arena.
Mm-hmm.
Disney has also, I mean, the whole concept of the evil stepmother, I mean, it is.
Ah,
And what I see stepmoms doing is to avoid being an evil stepmom, they
uh-huh.
become sort of wash rags. They become,
Oh,
anything you want. Sure, I'll cook dinner, I'll clean, I'll
mm-hmm.
scrub the floors, whatever you want. I'll do
Mm-hmm.
all your laundry, even though you're 21 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So and really, I know we're probably don't have time to get into this, but the fun never ends for step parenting. So a lot of my younger stepmoms especially think, oh, after 18, we're home free.
Ah,
There are
yes,
still many challenges.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's interesting in the sense that I I would have to think that stepmoms would be divided into two categories, ones that have professional lives and ones that don't. All right. That either because their new husband has the financial wherewithal or out of their own desire that they want to stay home. All right, that they're willing to become a full-time in-home parent. Is there a difference in terms of step parenting stressors if it's one way or the other?
Well, I think there certainly is a difference that you get more responsibilities if you're working, if you're a stay-at-home
Staying
mom.
at home. Okay.
Yeah, you do. Frankly, I don't have many of those in my community.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it just reflects, the society at large. What I do have, I mentioned that I have support groups, and
Hmm.
I have three different support groups. I have one that is free each month. Anybody can come, it's public. Then
Okay.
I have two private ones for my clients. And the reason I mention this is one is for child-free stepmoms, and the
Right.
other is for stepmoms who have children of their own.
Okay.
And there is a difference there because child-free stepmoms have they have a lot more to process
Okay.
than, than stepmoms who have their own children, and also in how they view the society, how they internalize society's view of them not having children of their own.
Okay. Let me ask you this with
Yeah,
regard to these free groups that you run.
yeah,
Um, how can somebody in our audience find those groups? Where's the best place for them to go?
easy. They can go on my website, which is cambioscoaching.com, and it's listed under my bookings tab. They can contact me directly, which I would love. Um,
Okay.
and it's susan@cambioscoaching.com. It's the Spanish word for changes. It's CAMBIOS coaching.
Gotcha. Okay, great. One last question before we go. How can friends and family support step parents? What's the best thing they can do?
Yeah, I think the best thing we all can do for our friends, family, clients, customers is not make assumptions that everything is great.
Okay.
And to actually ask how things are going and expressing your empathy that how difficult step parenting can be. That just opens the door for someone to say, yeah, I've had some issues. And I think if we don't make assumptions about how people are doing, that's a huge gift.
Wonderful. Susan, give us that website again before we go.
Yeah, it's Cambios, CAMBIOS, coaching, COACHING.com.
Wonderful. Susan Haworth, thank you so much for being on the show. We've definitely broken new ground, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Marc Gertz. You've been listening to Divorcing Your Mortgage. Please get home safe. Have a wonderful weekend. Kiss your spouse, and we'll see you again next week.
In 20 years or so, dear, I'll wish that you were dead. I'll never love you then at all the way I do today. So please remember when I leave in December, I told you so in May.